Okay, so the Jeffrey Epstein story. For years, it's been this tangled, chaotic mess of power, politics, and just horrifying allegations. But what do the so-called Epstein files really say? We're going to try to cut through all the noise and just break down the facts. Things really just blew up into a political firestorm in 2025. And honestly, a lot of that was thanks to bombshell claims just like this one, a now deleted tweet from Elon Musk. I mean, this single post just turned the pressure up to 11 and kicked off a massive national controversy. All right, to get a handle on all this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll tackle the myth of the list. Then we'll look at how this whole thing erupted into a political firestorm. After that, we'll dive into the official investigation, what the files actually tell us, and finally, where things stand now with all the unresolved fallout. Okay, first things first, we really need to be clear about the words we're using. Because in the public conversation, 2 very different things often get mashed together, and telling them apart is absolutely key to understanding any of this. So here's the absolute key takeaway. The files, they're 100% real. We're talking over 300 gigabytes of documents, flight logs, court records, a mountain of data. But the list, the idea of a single, tidy document of high-profile clients, that's a myth. As far as anyone knows, it just doesn't exist. So how in the world did this idea of a list go from, a fringe theory to a full-blown political crisis that had the entire country talking? Well, let's just look at the timeline. You can see how 2025 just became this perfect storm. It starts as a campaign promise, then Musk's tweet throws gasoline on the fire, which leads to this really shocking memo from the DOJ. And it all ends with Congress stepping in demanding answers. It was just one thing after another. And you gotta remember, this wasn't some minor issue during the campaign. Releasing these files was a central promise. You had key allies like Senator J.D. Vance here saying this was a crucial part of, cleaning up the swamp. But then something really weird happened. Once the administration was actually in office, the official story took a hard right turn, a complete 180 that honestly shocked just about everyone. Yeah, this memo from the Department of Justice, it was an absolute bombshell. I mean, after all that talk, all those promises to expose everything, the government's official conclusion was that the client list wasn't real and there was no evidence of some huge blackmail operation. And you know what? Nobody bought it. Literally no one. Instead of calming things down, it just made everyone more suspicious. You had people from totally opposite ends of the universe, pretty much everyone, looking at this and saying, wait a minute, that can't be right. Okay, so if there's no neat and tidy list, then what in the world is actually in these thousands and thousands of pages of documents? Let's take a neutral look at some of the most prominent names that pop up and what the files say about them. All right, let's start with Donald Trump. His name comes up, get this, over 1,000 times in the documents that have been released so far, and it paints a really complex, sometimes contradictory picture. So when you dig in, the documents detail this long and pretty complicated relationship. It goes way back to the 80s. You've got public praise from Trump, like in that 2002 interview. There are social events, but then there's also a major falling out where Epstein gets banned from Mar-a-Lago. And on top of all that, you have these really strange and frankly concerning emails.
But wow, maybe the most damning stuff comes straight from Epstein himself. In one email, he basically implies he has dirt on Trump, writing this very line right here. It's pretty chilling.
Okay, now for another former president who's mentioned all over these documents. Bill Clinton. And for him, most of the mentions are about the years after he'd already left the White House. So his connection seems to revolve around flights on Epstein's jet from what were described as charitable trips, and also a whole bunch of White House visits back when he was president. Now, this is a really important point. While his name is in there, no victim has ever actually accused Clinton of a crime. However, the files do have some really disturbing stuff that's secondhand. In a deposition, under oath, one of the victims testified that Epstein himself said this about Clinton. And it's not just about the former presidents. The documents are sprinkled with all sorts of other prominent names from, well, pretty much everywhere. Science, tech, big business, even royalty. Okay, and this is maybe the most important thing to get about all these other names. Context is everything. I mean, everything. The reason a name appears can vary wildly.
On one hand, you've got Stephen Hawking, whose name only shows up because Epstein wanted to debunk a false rumor about him. On the other, you've got people like Prince Andrew, who's listed as a passenger on Epstein's plane. The context is absolutely critical. So, after all of that, where are we now? Well, honestly, we're left with a whole lot of frustration, victims who are still fighting for justice, and frankly, way more questions than answers. And you really have to think about the victims in all this. For them, this whole process, this slow drip, drip, drip of information, all of it wrapped up in politics, it's just been infuriating. Their voices, like this one from Stacey Williams, are really at the heart of this whole fight for the truth. And in the middle of all this, President Trump did a complete flip-flop. He went from championing release the list during the campaign to now calling the whole thing the Jeffrey Epstein hoax and saying the documents were faked by his opponents. It's a pretty stark reversal.
I mean, just look at this number, 427 to 1. That was the vote in the House of Representatives. That number just screams how much everyone from both sides of the aisle wants the full story out. It's an overwhelming demand for transparency. And that leaves us right here with the one big, nagging question that's at the very heart of this entire mess. You've got victims demanding justice. You have near unanimous political will. So why? Why does the full truth about Jeffrey Epstein and his network remain so